Everyone, welcome to an exciting Blue Hoodie Saturday edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I am so glad to be talking with author Laura Leigh Morris. May I call you Dr. Morris? Is that okay?
You can call me Dr. Morris if you'd like.
All right, all right. I know we're both rocking the PhDs here in
Yes.
addition to our hoodies, and you are the author of Jaws of Life as well as the novel The Stone Catchers. Uh, Interesting work, very literary work, and very, may I say, Appalachian. Is that an accurate description?
Oh, definitely. Yes, very
Yes.
Appalachian.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that. I've spent my entire life in one place or another in Appalachia. Once upon a time, I took a great course in Appalachian literature when I was working on my master's degree, and just a part of literature and the place that I love. So glad to have you on to be talking about all of these things. And please tell us, what is your background? What is your PhD in?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Jason. I
Of
really
course.
appreciate it. My PhD is in English with a creative dissertation, so it really is very much creative writing centered.
Love that. Love that. I'm a big fan of like the Nick Susanus comics approach to dissertating. I'm a big fan of Carolyn Ellis and that creative autoethnography and
Hmm.
Clarendon and Connolly and that narrative approach. So I hope folks out there are taking notes from this discussion.
Oh, definitely. I hope so. I mean, truthfully, the first my first book, Jaws of Life, which is a short story collection, it was an early draft, or it is a revision of the creative part of my dissertation. Yeah, yes. So that was exciting. It was like, okay, my first book, and it's different than in the dissertation, but not horribly so. I mean, some stories have been removed, some things have been moved around, some of it's been revised, but a lot of it, most of it is really straight from the dissertation.
All the cool points, all the cool points. Well, now I want to read your dissertation. Would you mind sending me a copy of that at some point?
I could send you my dissertation. I'm not sure you want to read the critical introduction. I don't think I
I
knew as much what I was doing there.
that's always the case. It's always the case. We look back at the dissertation and we're like, oh my gosh. But that
Oh,
is
yeah,
why the learning is a process and all the things.
exactly.
And it's not like you're writing that in the most peaceful time of your life either. Um,
No.
yeah. So what inspires you about writing in the written word?
You know, I am always kind of amazed by the world around us and amazed by life. And I use writing as a way to help me understand that world. I use it as a way to help me explore the world. So in the Stonecatchers, I'm writing about the aftermath of a school shooting. And I did school shooter training. Like as an educator, I had to do school shooter training, and it was kind of horrifying. And it's a little bit it's scary, even though you know it's only training, it's scary. And I really couldn't get it out of my head and couldn't get this thought of what does it mean to live through something like that out of my head. And this novel was my way of writing my way through that question of what does it mean to live through something that horrifying. So whenever I'm kind of amazed by something or horrified or just have really strong thoughts about it, I I make sense of it through writing. And sometimes it's something that ends up published, sometimes it's something that stays completely on my computer. But for me, it's really about it's my most straightforward way or my most creative way or internal way of really looking closely at any subject that I'm thinking about.
Well, I love the power of literature for helping other people process experiences too. So I think
Oh
those
yeah.
are stories of dealing with events like a school shooting and some of the emotions, the trauma. Those are really important stories to have out there for people that either have anxiety about that, have been through it, or just want to understand it better.
Oh yeah. And this is I've had a couple people say I just went through either a shooting or a scare of a shooting or I have that in my past and I can't read this. And I'm like, that's totally fine. But other people say, I actually really need to dive into this because I need to think about this more. And I love I don't know, I always use I think a lot of the books I read, I'm thinking about like what is I'm either really familiar with something and want somebody else's take on it to see how I can work through it in a different way, or it's a part of the world I know nothing about. And I'm like, oh, let me explore this thing I know nothing about through somebody else's storytelling.
And, and to folks out there that are not ready for it, there might be a time in life when they are. There might be a time in life where they're searching for that voice and processing. So very, very powerful. That takes us to thinking about, talking about writing in place as well. So any particular steps that you think about when you're thinking about reflecting life in Appalachia? Is there anything especially important to you that you keep in mind?
Um, I really try to remember, I mean, I try to think a lot about where I grew up. So I grew up in North Central West Virginia, and my
Mhm.
whole family still lives there. So my husband and kids and I, we go up there at least twice a year. And when I'm there, I really just try to experience the place and think about what was it like when I was growing up, because I was growing up in the 80s and 90s there, and it was a
Mhm.
very different place then than it is now. And then what has it become? And I really just try to like, I don't know, I'm big on walking the land, on being really physically in a place to experience it. And I try to help that, think about how I can bring that back into my writing. Like, what does it feel like to be there? And even the book I'm writing now, this woman, she's hiking through the forest a lot near her trailer in North Central West Virginia. And I am thinking about these hikes I used to take in middle and high school. Like I still hike now, but I'm hiking in South Carolina, I'm hiking in Western North Carolina. It's not quite the same. So I think about like, oh, when I was in middle school, high school, I would, put a backpack on my back and throw like a banana and an apple and a sandwich in there and just go like climb up these hills and be crunching around. And I always had to think about what time of year is it? What do I need to be wearing? Even what color do I need to be wearing? Is it hunting season? And all of that. So I'm really trying to transport myself to these times in my life
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then use those details that really still stand out to me all these years later and say, okay, how can I fit these into the work?
Well, I have lots of connection points there as well. I also grew up in West Virginia in the 80s and
Ah,
90s in southwestern Virginia,
mm-hmm.
very close to the Virginia line. And I also was a big hiker. I used to hike with my dad, uh, weekly, if not daily, almost
Oh,
daily,
nice.
just on the family property and adjacent properties. And, I tried to take a hike this past Thanksgiving
Mm-hmm.
season. And there was literally a barrier. These trees, because of the hurricanes, had
Yes.
fallen down. So that's a metaphor I'm still exploring about the past and those journeys as well.
Yeah, it's one of those it's this how do we dive into this place and I like how you're like trying to go hiking but then the present jumps in. I'm not in love with the idea of the trees down from Hurricane Helene.
Yeah,
We're we're dealing with that here too. We've had quite a few trees down. We're still in the middle of cleanup. But I know that even the trails in Greenville, people couldn't walk and run on. And my husband, who's a poet, is already thinking about this, already thinking about like this major thing and the way that the land has changed and the landscape has changed in the midst of this giant storm and how we think about it.
definitely. And as we're talking, writing is that place to process so much and
Oh, yeah.
share that story. Any particular steps in the creative process that you engage with? Are there particular places, particular rituals that you have?
For me, it is an everyday practice. I used to, when I was younger, I did I wouldn't write for a while and then I would like sit on a chair and write for 8 hours one day. And then
Mhm.
and this is when I was younger. And then once I started my PhD, it really became this everyday practice. And now that I have a 3-year-old at home, which really limits the amount of time I can do anything that isn't
Yes.
playing with a 3-year-old. So what I have to do is I have to carve time out of my day. So my ritual now is 30 minutes minimum every day. So in the morning, I drop my son off at daycare. I come home and I get my 30 minutes in. If I have extra time, if I'm not teaching that day, or I don't have a pile of papers waiting to be graded, or I don't have whatever else comes up in life, I can sometimes go for an hour and a half, but for me, it is an everyday process of just sitting my butt in the chair and trying to get a few words on the page. It's not about getting the right words or the best words, it's just about words on the page. Because for me, the real cream is in the revision. It's if I have words on the page, I can always make them better. If there aren't any words on the page, then there's nothing to work with to begin with.
I'm exploring that in art too, of like I have to put something down on the page in pencil before I can go in and ink. And I think we both, it sounds like, come from the Anne Lamott school of thinking about writing. I
Oh
think.
yes, oh
Yeah,
yes. You know, I still share that essay, Shitty First Drafts,
it's a
um,
great.
who,
Yeah.
with whoever I can, and it's just such a great. You can bleep that out if you have to.
No,
I'm not sure. Oh,
we will leave it. Yeah.
okay, okay. But I love that essay and just giving everyone permission to just write whatever you write, get the words down. Revision is where the magic truly, truly happens in writing, but that first draft is daunting because it's hard to give yourself permission to not write the best thing. And I think by coming at it every day, I'm giving myself permission just to get words on the page. And any day that I get words on the page is it's a successful writing day because they add up. Um, I used to think, how am I ever going to write a novel? A novel's 80,000 words. How am I ever going to do this? But it's a little bit every day. And if you just keep chipping away at it, eventually it adds up to something big.
Well, I know you're at Furman, is that right?
Yes, yes, I am.
Yeah. How has your role as an educator informed your work? How does that play in?
So in my writing classrooms, and I teach all writing at Furman. I teach some literature, but it's mostly writing and it's mostly creative writing with some first year writing. But the way I look at it is my students and I are all working writers. We're all in the same practice together. We're at different places in our careers, but we are. So I I treat everything happening in the classroom as an extension of what's happening on my computer each day, and I teach and I think about like, oh, I had this conversation with my students, or I we read an essay together, or we read a novel together, and I'm always asking myself, how can I let that inform my own writing? So, and I'm inviting them too to say, okay, well, I'm learning this in the classroom. What can I use outside of the classroom in my writing? And I'm inviting them also then to bring their writing experience into the classroom. Like, what are you writing? How are you writing it? What are you interested in? So this semester, I am just finishing up teaching a class on novel writing for the first time. And yes, it's exciting and it's all undergraduates. And I have 12 students in the class, and 11 of them are writing speculative fiction. So really thinking about like, oh, well, this is where they're coming from. So let's bring in more speculative fiction. Let's talk about like what does it mean to write speculatively? What are the different subgenres, genres in that, and really exploring that. And then I end up bringing that home and saying, what in my work is speculative? Is anything speculative? And starting to let that spin out.
Any particular mentor texts that have been go-tos for speculative fiction?
Oh, so for me, I really love the things that ride right on the edge. So I really love
Hmm.
almost a magic realism. So
Yeah.
anything Gabriel Garcia Marquez does is kind of
Huh.
like the everything. A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings or The Handsomest Drowned Man in the World are two short stories that I love to teach. But I've been diving into some novels that just kind of touch on it. So one novel I love that I read this summer is Rachel Yoder's Night Bitch,
Huh.
which is actually coming out as a film, but there's this question of is the main character turning into a dog? And it's never like the book itself, you're always wondering how much of this is real and how much is in her head. And it's fascinating because everything else about the world of the story is every day, except
Yeah.
she thinks she's turning into a dog. And it
Love it.
just throws everything for a loop. So, yeah.
Margaret Atwood has also been a master of that too, with like
Hmm.
Oryx and Crake and a couple of those.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So it's always, and I'm always looking for more and diving in, and I'm finding that most of the books that I like right now have at least a hint of speculation in them. Not everything, but just something in there that makes me go, oh, this just turned the world on its head a little bit. So.
Love when literature does that for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I actually just finished a collection of short stories. I just finished writing a collection of short stories about motherhood that I started when my son, right after my son was born, because it's the weirdest thing I've ever done. And I didn't do it until I was in my 40s. And I'm like, what am I doing here? And I noticed that the only way to make sense of motherhood for me was to get all speculative and weird in it. So hopefully that collection will find a home soon. But all about like I'm thinking when I find something really weird, I think approaching it in a really weird way in my writing just
Mhm.
makes me happy and it makes the most sense to me.
Um, well, by means of a final question, if I'm a listener out there, if I want to find out more about your work and explore and get to know the world as you see it, and by the way, I'm now going to read Night Bitch as well. It's now on my list. Where might I go and check out your work?
Well, I'm glad you're going to read Night Bitch. That's awesome. It's such a good book. But you can learn more about my work at my website, which is lauraleigh.morris.com. It's LauraLeighMorris.com. And you can read about the two books that I have out. And you can also read some short stories, some of those weird short stories, and some other essays that I've written.
We're glad to have you back anytime to talk about writing, the creative process, any avenue that you'd like to explore.